do think cinemas in a good place. I think particularly the cinemas that have been focusing on the user experience, and if you look at chains like Everyman in the UK that have just purely gone for that high end, experience, and Alamo, and also other companies like Picture House in the UK, they're all doing very, very well. In fact, I think Everyman sold way above its punching power for tickets for Tenet when that released last summer. So we're just going to have to get a lot cleverer about what we do. But the overall concept of cinema, I think, is competing with, going to the pub or going out with friends or going to a restaurant. It's not really competing with the couch. And I think the toothaches for subscription VOD are about to start now, and everything's going to be set to become much more competitive. Like I said, we operate by, selling content online, whether that's a bum on a seat in a cinema or a download of a stream or a subscription to a VOD service. And on the VOD side of things, we're seeing user acquisition costs going up by 4 times. So I wouldn't say it's all great for VOD either, because one of the things that we're seeing is a rising cost per subscription for the platforms that we've been working with. And I think there's also a share of wallet conversation that's going on in everyone's collective subconscious. You might have a Netflix, an Amazon Prime, you might have some specialty, interest in a certain type of VOD platform that has a type of content that surrounds your hobby. But we're only going to really accept 3 or 4, maybe 5 platforms at a push within our monthly wallet. And then we'll be back up to what we were paying for cable television 5 or 6 years ago. So one of the interesting stats that I saw coming out of Sky was that peak viewing times for things like Sky Now are Thursday, 2 p.m. in the afternoon during the pandemic. Well, that's not going to happen anymore because people are getting back to work and going back into the offices. I think that necessity is the mother of invention is a good term. We're going to start to see an explosion of innovation. It was an IndieWire article I think I read about a month or 2 ago from Cannes, and everyone is mucking around with day-and-date release strategies, simultaneous release, exclusive PVOD deals, and everything else. So we've been operating in an industry which has kind of been a little bit stuck, for many, many years. And so one perspective is the pandemic has radically altered the industry. The other perspective is the pandemic has actually just accelerated what we've been sort of experiencing for the last 10 years. We have a global footprint, so our team is spread out throughout Europe. We've got an office over in Perth, in Australia, that we opened about 3 months ago, and that's given us quite a fascinating insight into the picture from Southeast Asia, Americas, and Europe as well. And what we're seeing is that, it's not a homogenous picture out there. It's not all the same strategy. I think we're maybe a little bit stuck in Europe because we have a very established, very old, as I mean, it's gone back a long period of time. It's a very well-established cinema industry here. I think it's 1,500 locations in Italy alone. Most of them are, small mom and dad operations. So that's good from a business perspective. But what's actually happened is that we've become a little bit stuck in our ways. And we had one process for releasing movies, right? Which was it's got to go into theatrical release, and then you've got to have a 3-month hiatus, and then it can go into TVOD. And, we thought that model was worldwide. I can tell you in Japan right now, the cinemas are actively collaborating with the distributors and the agencies. The cinemas contribute to a data pool, which allows the distributors to buy each other's data and also the cinema's data to complement the campaigns. And so Japan is a very conservative society, but they have probably one of the most innovative audience data platforms out there, and it's freely used by the studios and I think some of the independents as well that contribute to it. Event cinemas in Australia, if you're working as a distributor there and you're releasing a film into their network of cinemas, they'll provide you with a tracking dashboard that will allow you to see in real time how your ticket sales are progressing. And I think you can also use the audience data that's coming from those transactions. So, there's a lot of radical change. It's just, I think we've perhaps been a little bit, stuck in our ways. So that there are tracks in the business that I totally understand, and particularly when there are media commitments where you've already, bought placements and things like that take a long time to negotiate. But there are reactive elements, and I think a lot of this trap in thinking is it's like, First World War planning, like we're going to do this. We expected to do that. We're going to buy these placements, and then, when it comes down to launch, then everyone is just, hoping that the numbers come in. What we've been seeing over the course of the campaigns that we've been working on is that we can start to spot hits very early on in the cycle of the marketing. And it's not just down to how the trailer performs or things like that. There are, online audiences are incredibly fickle. Like if you're not capturing their attention within 3 to 4 seconds with something that's, arresting, then, it's very difficult to make the rest of the campaign work if you haven't got the initial attention. I've got a few friends of mine who are producers, and they regularly argue with me. And this balance between art and data, I think there is a perfect inflection point. I think, yes, you can use too much data and end up running a US presidential campaign in terms of everything being carefully plotted around these lines that you're following. The other side is you can spend 10 years working on your windsurfing project to shoot, some weird little film and raise money around that and not have a life, because essentially you've made something that's not commercially viable. And I think that's a tragedy as well. There are two things that kind of frighten me. One is, how do we get younger audiences back into the habit of going to cinema? The other side is, if I look at the major studios, there's been a consolidation between the home entertainment departments and the theatrical departments over the years. They've been sitting closer and closer together. And now, several of the major studios have released their own VOD platforms. And I'm just imagining the conversations that must be going on in the marketing planning meetings, because you're going to have data sets which are going to be really rich in one side of the conversation. So someone working on the Paramount Plus team on the marketing side is going to have, the lifetime value of their customers. They're going to have the average time that are on screen, what they've browsed, what's the most popular content within the network. And then on the other side of the discussion, you'll have the theatrical team, which would traditionally the heroes in the marketing cycle, because they led all the downstream revenue that came from the premiere night success. And the only data that they're going to have is the number of tickets that have been sold. So from my perspective, when I think through that strategy in my head, the cinema teams or the theatrical teams are going to be in a weaker light when they're talking about their cinema data set, as opposed to the Paramount Plus team, which is going to be talking about this rich super data. And I think one of the main things that's going to change over the next 5 years is everyone's going to be talking about first-party data now. I think that's absolutely critical across the industry. How it's utilized, how it's ingested into the campaigns, what does it say, how does it visualize, does it correlate into an uplift in value? And it won't be long before I think most people in this room will be having, return on advertising-based conversations with, for every euro that I put into my marketing package, how many euros does that yield back to me? That's all going to be exposed over the next 5 years. And I think this is the critical bit. The cinemas, I think, are sitting on a real opportunity to innovate. It's going to be very technically challenging to move the foyer into the digital space. But I think the companies that do start to do this now are the ones that are going to really succeed. And I think, that data set, as I said, is as powerful as any Netflix database.